So we do know from the work that we've done, looking at these thousands of events across the US, that the deadly fires and the destructive ones are the ones that are moving fast. This shouldn't really be a surprise, like we kind of intuitively know this, but there's been so much focus on mega fires and how big they are that we've kind of lost track of the issue that really matters in suppressing fires and getting communities prepared is how fast those fires are actually moving. We had probably one of the outlier examples happen here in Colorado with the Marshall Fire in terms of how fast that fire was moving. The fire suppression team was not at all focused on fire suppression. It was focused on life safety and evacuation and team safety as well. They were not putting people into place because of the threat that fire and how fast it was moving. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that fire was very tiny. Like it was 14,000 acres, very small relative to the August complex, which was over 1 million acres. Or there's many events that have blown through kind of the size thresholds that we thought were possible. It was news to have a 1 million acre event. But fundamentally, we actually need good fire in the landscape to prevent the risk or reduce the risk of future disastrous fires. So part of the science work that we're doing is trying to shift the narrative away from mega fires being a size problem to fast fires being a speed problem. Okay, another fast-moving event, the Camp Fire in 2018. This is in Paradise, California, that also burned thousands of homes and killed maybe 80 to 100 people because of how fast it was moving. Entire neighborhoods burned down, and one thing we're also seeing and noticing is that the speed of fires is also being propelled by the urban structures, not necessarily by the pine trees or the bushes or the grasses. Like what we're seeing is that the homes themselves are actually starting to propagate fires and move them through neighborhoods as well. Marshall Fire here in Colorado. The Lahaina Fire also was a very fast-moving event propelled by several different things. And fire is a great integrator. It integrates the fuels that are available. It integrates the ignition source. It integrates the climate. There were a lot of abandoned agricultural landscapes here that had invasive grasses, very flammable. A power line that went down. So it's a human-related ignition under high wind conditions that were kind of the setup for this particular event. And that combo of invasive species, warmer conditions, and also the oscillation between wet and dry, which also creates fuels. So people often ask me, like, what's our fire season outlook look like? And I'm like, yeah, it's great. We had a wonderfully humid and wet May. But what that does is that sets us up for a lot of grass growth and fuels that will dry out over the summer. And so I look for the oscillation between wet and dry to understand what our risk is going to be. Southern California fires that happened in January, also very fast-moving events and urban home-propelled fuels. Okay, so this was my point about megafires. Speed, not size, is the key factor making wildfires deadly and destructive. And we need to reorient to that because our insurance, our resilience strategies, everything is tied to fire probabilities or fire size and not about fire speed. So we have to reorient our entire societal infrastructure for dealing with fires around when they matter, and they matter because of how fast they're moving. Okay. So fire speed's been hard to track, so this is where remote sensing and satellites come in to help us better understand this phenomenon. Part of the reason is because our satellites are not designed to be tracking fire. They're designed to be tracking other things. And so their overpass times are too infrequent to capture how fast fires are moving. So that's one of the issues right now in our current kind of NASA-based constellation of satellites that's looking at the planet. They're not designed to track fires. So what we did was we looked at burned area estimates to study how fast fires are moving. This is kind of our cleverness, and what we brought to the table around this was we're essentially creating an algorithm to wring out fire speed from existing fire data. And the way that we can do that is by looking at a particular satellite set of data called MODIS, which produces a burned area pixel. So its pixels are about 500 meters by 500 meters, and it will tell you, did that pixel burn on a given day or not? And so what we do is we cluster all of those burned area pixels together, and we essentially lasso them and say, okay, that's the same event that happened over multiple days or weeks. And then we reconstruct how fast that fire moved over that period of time. And so what we do then is we take that lasso, we cluster burned area pixels, and then we say, okay, all of these pixels were lassoed on a single day. So that fire grew, say, 100 pixels on that day versus the previous day it only grew 10 pixels. And so that's how we're able to estimate and retroactively capture the daily spread rates. And this is an image of the daily infrared flights that suppression teams capture, and our reconstruction using satellite-based data matches pretty well with what the infrared data is showing from an airborne platform during suppression team response. And then we come up with what was the day that the fire moved fastest, or what we're calling in jargony scientific terms, maximum daily fire growth rate. Okay, so what is a fast fire? So we were kind of left with this question of like, well, how fast is too fast? How do we make that determination? And so what we ended up doing was matching the fast fire data from remote sensing, or the fire speed data from remote sensing, with societal impact data. So this is part of the like building your constellation of data. We knew that for every event, we also had information, this is at the county level, but we had information on how many structures were destroyed or threatened from the daily incident command reports. So what we did was we went out and we like essentially created a little bot that went to all of the incident command reports. There's like 120,000 of them. They're all human entered data. And so we were like, okay, can we pull all of that information together and tag it to an individual fire, and then understand how fast was too fast based on how many structures were threatened or how many structures were destroyed. So we did that, and we came up with essentially a number of how fast is too fast, and it's about 4,000 acres a day. So a fire that grows faster than 4,000 acres a day is the fire that will burn homes. We also looked at property exposure, so we just asked the question of like, okay, well, how many homes were within a mile or a couple miles of a fast-moving event over the historical roughly 20-year period? And we did that using Zillow data. So we have a partnership with Zillow, so the 200 million housing records that you have access to on your phone, we have all of the background information on those individual homes and their locations, their addresses, and we can say, okay, how many homes were in the way? And it's 3 million homes. So 3 million homes were within a mile or so of a fast-moving event over 20 years. And that's an important number for a lot of reasons. One, it gives us a better estimation of our actual risk, right? Like insurance companies come to us all the time and they're like, can you help us better understand? And I'm like, yeah, all I gotta do, and this is going back to, all I do is build maps. I can build a map for you of how many homes were within all the wildfires in the western US over 20 years. I can do that for Colorado, I can do that for Boulder County, so that we better understand our risk and better prepare for what's gonna happen in the future. Okay, so this is just a better explainer on that Zillow data. What we do is we look at the individual home addresses and we aggregate that over time based on the year. So we can go back to 1860 based on Zillow's data, and what they've done is they've just collected individual parcel level information from counties. So they've also done the hard work of aggregating a lot of data together that's available on individual addresses. We also matched it with the ICS 209 incident command suppression report data. And there's lots of other information in there too. It's not just structures destroyed, it's evacuations as well, which are important, and we're exploring that data in another project. And then this is our reconstructed burned area and fire spread rate data based on the day since ignition for the Checo Bar fire as another example of how we reconstruct fire speed. Not surprisingly, the ICS 209 data, this is threatened structures, destroyed structures. This matches what we're seeing in terms of the satellite-based data and the consequence. So the temporal sequence works, so we know we're doing a good job. But this is the analytical framework where we come up with that number of about 4,000 acres a day is too fast. We essentially model the structure impact as a function of how fast fires are moving. And then we come up with a series of regression trees to say, okay, how many structures do you get destroyed when this fire is this fast? And we go through that for every fire to come up with that number across all those events. And then this is just a plot of the fast fires, so how fast they're moving, and then the number of structures damaged or destroyed. And we see a split somewhere around 900 events that are damaging structures. And those 900 events or so are the ones that are causing the problems for structures. We also, the colored dots are based on land cover type. It's also important we see the fastest moving fires in grassland systems. And that's also kind of not surprising given how fast the fuels are. They're very fine, they're very easy to ignite relative to forest systems. So again, it's like a shift in the Smokey Bear concept of like, oh, actually, the biggest threat in terms of speed is grasslands, not out in the middle of the woods. How are we thinking about how we're building into grassland systems? We often think about the wildland-urban interface as a forest problem, not a grassland problem, but it actually is a grassland problem too. Okay, so this is that threshold that comes out of that modeling analysis. That's 20 hectares per day or 4,000 acres. That's where we get that number. The number of events that are moving this fast, it's only about 3% of all fires are moving fast enough to destroy structures. So it's a very small proportion of our overall fires that are doing this damage. In total, over a couple of decades, 80,000 structures were destroyed. 80% of that, roughly, were because of fast-moving events. Fast-moving events cost us $19 billion in suppression costs, and that's about 60% of our total overall suppression effort budget. And 3 million residential properties were exposed within 4 kilometers. So the reason we put this together is because we want people to know. We want people to know how big this risk actually is. Where do fast fires occur? Mostly in the western US and Great Plains, but they're all over the place. These dots represent the fastest moving events. And the maximum growth represented by those colored circles represents the fastest of the fast. So the darker colors are the ones that are moving the fastest out of those events. We also see them across different ecoregions. So the bottom line here is essentially wherever you have high winds, you can get fast-moving events, which is kind of everywhere. Certainly there are predominant places that get more winds than others, and there are certain types of topographies that also create high wind conditions, high and dry winds. We call them Chinooks. Southern California calls them Santa Anas. And there are downslope wind events that are very, very dry and hot in kind of the late fall season. Are fires getting faster? The answer is yes, they are. So one of the other really powerful things that came out of our work is that we were able to document how fast fires are moving and the trend over a 2-decade period. And the red areas are the ecoregions where we're seeing an increase in fire speed over a very short, relatively short period of time, only 20 years. And the reason why it's important to document this is because what it means is we actually are going to expect fires to get faster as a function of very likely warming temperatures, creating conditions that are more conducive for fires. So what are the implications and the takeaways? We're delineating a new class of fires, fast fires, the ones that are destructive, the ones that matter for society, which is a very different class than just thinking about megafires and their size. Fires that are fast matter for life safety and structure impacts. Large fires do matter, but they matter more for ecosystems and they generate a lot of smoke. So we care about big for people when we're talking about smoke impacts. Fast fires overall were responsible for 88% of the structures destroyed, and they're growing faster. So they're 2.5 times faster across the western US. They're 4 times faster in California. So California has actually seen a much more substantial increase in the rate of spread or the fire speed. On the management front, fire speed matters for firefighter decision making in real time and how fire suppression activities can work in or among communities. And one of the big lessons is that we need to get communities prepared in advance, because once a fast fire is moving, it's almost too late. It's almost too late because of the suppression teams. They can't operate, they can't fly aircraft, they can't put personnel in harm's way. They're just watching the event unfold, or they're focused on getting people out and evacuation. We need to rethink our grassland fire management strategies. My concept of the WUI definitely changed as a function of the Marshall Fire. Seeing a Chuck E. Cheese get evacuated and a Costco and a hotel burn down, like that was really not on my radar in terms of understanding how fires were behaving. And so we do need to prepare communities for those types of events. Home hardening measures are critical. Defensible space. Firefighters talk about the home ignition zone, 0 to 5 feet of a home, and what's in that area and how could homes get ignited. There's other things that can be done, and in fact, there's some great studies out there by Headwaters Economics and others that show for a few $1,000s, you can mitigate a huge amount of the risk within 5 feet of your home. And it's simple things like the mesh venting on your roof vents, increasing the density so that embers don't get sucked into your attic. It's the mulch that goes right up against your siding. It's that wood fence panel that is right adjacent to your home. More expensive things obviously are roof type and roof material and decking, but there's a lot of things that can be done. We know, and we're expecting, that increasing fire speed is going to continue to challenge emergency response, evacuation planning, and community preparedness. Like, how many of our communities have a reasonable evacuation plan for a fast-moving event, or safe harbors like asphalt parking lots that people can go to as an intermediate step in an evacuation plan? So early warning systems, better evacuation plans, integrating fire speed into measures of community risk, because like I said, doesn't exist right now. People are just thinking about burned area, how big the fire is, whether it's going to burn, instead of thinking about what's the likelihood or chance of a fast-moving event. Okay, another really cool management implication that came out of the work that we did on the data front was understanding how fast fires were growing on a daily basis from the day that they started. How many of them happened within the first few days? And it turns out that most of the fires, their growth is concentrated towards the first 5 days of an event. And so that tells us about suppression response, either effectiveness, or that there's really just these single days that we need to be worried about at the front end of a fire event. Some other work that we're doing that is contextualizing this, also leveraging big data. We've put a lot in harm's way. We looked at how many homes were actually just within a fire perimeter or close to a fire perimeter, and it's tens of millions. So 59 million homes were actually within a kilometer of any wildfire. And that's an order of magnitude bigger estimate than any previous estimate. And so what that means is our insurance sector is totally oriented towards the wrong risk level. We also plotted how many of those ignitions were human-related versus lightning-related. And not surprisingly, the red dots all represent human ignitions. So not only are tens of millions of homes within a kilometer of a wildfire perimeter, we are also the ones responsible for starting the 97% of the ignitions. Yeah, it's craziness. This is another picture on that. Structure losses have increased 250% over a couple decade period as well. Also split by human and lightning ignitions in the red and the blue. The upshot here is just in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a lot more structure losses. And it's alarming. Like Colorado's largest destructive event in terms of number of homes lost was the Marshall Fire. That's the most destructive fire we've seen in Colorado history. This is not a problem only in terms of how we're thinking about fire, but we think about earthquakes and floods and hurricanes and where we've put our homes. We've plotted the worst hot spots in terms of hazards in those different colors on the panel on the left. And we've essentially put our homes in high hazard locations. 60% of our homes are located within hazard hotspots. So again, this is just me building maps. I'm like, okay, well, what are the worst hazards we have? We'll overlay individual home footprints from Zillow and just ask the question. This is a question a middle schooler could ask or a high schooler. And having the data at your fingertips like this enables you to be like, wow, what can you do? What can you do with the data? Another kind of take on the Marshall Fire, I stole my punchline here, but this is essentially saying that the Marshall Fire was the most destructive fire we saw. This is Zillow data from the Marshall Fire, where we plotted the year of development within the fire perimeter by year, and you can see kind of in the 1980s, 1990s, you get a huge burst of development. And so also the temporal nature of how we're building is important in the context of our fire risk as well. We looked at damage assessments after the fact to understand what were the home attributes that were most likely to lead to a structure being lost. So we looked at things like decking material, siding material, housing, and those things do make a difference. So we've definitely found a relationship with wood decking or wood siding or more flammable roofing materials as well. So that's ongoing work trying to understand, again, kind of next level beyond just knowing how many homes are at risk. We're also trying to understand what's the constellation of risk at a neighborhood level. How many homes within a neighborhood have vulnerable siding or decking material to understand neighborhood level risk. We're also revising the wildland-urban interface maps too. So this is also based on Zillow data, and this is going to be gobbledygook here on the bottom. But ultimately, what we're doing here is we're showing the areas in orange and red that are kind of higher risk in terms of where homes meet flammable vegetation. And because of Zillow data, we can get a much more refined estimate, because previous versions are based on census data at the census tract level, which is not very useful when you're trying to tackle the problem at an individual home or neighborhood scale. Future fire, we're doing projections using climate-based data, 10 different models of future fire, and the expected change in the number of fires and total burned area. And we are not getting off the fire train anytime soon. Like, we are absolutely locked in to some level of increased fire activity in the future. And so I say that not to scare people, but just to put the reality check on, we've got to do something about this problem. I had an opinion piece come out in the Washington Post soon after the LA fires, talking about what we can do about it. How do we prepare? Some of the solutions are probably already on the table in your communities. Wildfire Partners here in Boulder is doing really great work to help people prepare their homes. Like I said, home hardening, using fire to fight fire. We need to put more prescribed burning in the landscape. I call that building better and burning better. There's a lot we can do. So unlike other hazards, the one really great thing about fire is that it's something we can alter. We can change the shape of fire, and in fact, we've been doing that for millennia. And it's important to acknowledge that as well. Fire is very much a philosophical thing as well, and it's something that's tied to our evolutionary history. We are the fire species, and so that means that we can do something to change the course of fire. So with that, I'll acknowledge many of my co-authors who contributed this work, and also institutions. I'm a fellow at CIRES here as well as Anna is, and I direct EASL, which is Data Synthesis Center to support science, and then several other institutions involved in this work. Many different funders who I hope will continue to fund our work. Fingers crossed. Obviously, I value science, and I know you all do too. This is the center that I direct that's funded by NSF. I'll just give a shout out to them and my team. We do try and bring large teams together to work on data and help make data more accessible. And there might be opportunities. Check us out. We host an annual summit as well, and there might be something of interest. We do transformative science. We build cyber infrastructure, so we build all the platforms behind the data that help us analyze it and get access to data and do cloud compute. We also do education. We have an accessible online learning portal that's designed to help individuals learn Python skills. That's targeted towards like an introductory level, college level. That site, it's earthdatascience.org. It gets probably over 1 million users a year because we were told, hey, we don't have access to these skills. How can we learn about this? It's very much pick and choose your own adventure. In terms of the learning modules we've got on remote sensing data or Twitter data, we've got all kinds of different data flavors. So again, that site is earthdatascience.org if you want to check that out. And then we are also building community. We love to bring people together, practitioners, data scientists, AI modelers, to think about a problem that matters for the environment and try and work through solutions. So I just mentioned some of these aspects, but yeah, check us out, easel.org. And I think that might be my last slide. So thank you very much. I'll take some questions if you have some.